On the outskirts of Hangzhou, China, an Eiffel Tower rises above rows of French-style apartments. It looks like Paris, until you notice the empty streets and the hazy sky. A few hundred miles north in Beijing, commuters drive past a colossal glass and steel loop nicknamed the Big Pants, a skyscraper shaped like a giant pair of trousers. Across town, an avant-garde complex of curvy white domes, Zaha Hadid's Galaxy Soho, looms over old Hutong alleys. For a time, China's cities were showcases of bizarre architecture. Teapot-shaped museums, coin-shaped towers, even entire towns mimicking Europe. These eye-catching edifices announced China's arrival on the world stage. But in 2014, China's leaders abruptly declared war on weird buildings. What followed was a sweeping ban on odd architecture nationwide, a move as dramatic and puzzling as the buildings themselves. Why would the government of the world's fastest-growing cities suddenly outlaw avant-garde design? The answer lies in a profound shift in China's economic priorities and cultural identity. In Chinese official terms, weird architecture refers to buildings that are oversized, exotic, or odd-shaped, lacking in cultural tradition. This category spans ultra-modern designs that seem to defy gravity, as well as blatant copies of foreign landmarks. For over a decade, China was ground zero for such architecture, fueled by a construction boom on an unprecedented scale. Consider this. Between 2011 and 2013, China used about 6.4 gigatons of cement, more than the United States used in the entire 20th century. That mind-boggling statistic, first noted by Bill Gates, reflects the country's sprint to build cities, highways, and skylines overnight. In 1978, less than 20% of China's population lived in cities. By 2020, over 56% did. In fact, by 2009, China already had 221 cities with over 1 million people, compared to just 35 in all of Europe. This rapid urbanization, the largest in human history, set the stage for an explosion of ambitious architecture. Amid this building frenzy, local governments and developers often pursued architecture as a statement. China became infamous for its duplitecture, duplicate landmarks. The country is, or was, home to at least 10 White Houses, 3 Arcs de Triomphe, and 1 Eiffel Tower replica. Entire themed districts sprung up, a British Thames town near Shanghai, complete with a Gothic church and red telephone booths, a faux Austrian alpine village in Guangdong, and the Parisian-style Tianducheng development in Hangzhou, with a 108-meter Eiffel Tower copy at its center. These projects were more than quirky novelties. They symbolized an era when China eagerly borrowed global icons and futuristic designs to project modernity. And for a while, it worked. Skylines filled with conversation pieces, and city officials boasted of their unique landmarks. So why does this matter now? Because around 2014, China's leadership decided these architectural free-for-alls had gone too far. In a country where policy can reshape skylines literally overnight, the pronouncement to ban weird architecture sent shockwaves through the design and construction world. China's State Council, its cabinet, and the Communist Party's Central Committee issued national directives in 2016 forbidding oversized, xenocentric, weird buildings and urging a return to designs that are suitable, economic, green, and pleasing to the eye. The timing was no accident. Chinese cities were facing new challenges: mounting local debt, congested roads, and public backlash against wasteful vanity projects. This architectural clampdown is a window into China's current priorities. It reflects President Xi Jinping's drive to promote frugality, traditional culture, and a more sober image of China's development. In short, the story of weird architecture's rise and fall is a microcosm of China's changing mindset in the 21st century. With that context, let's rewind to see how China became the land of daring design in the first place. Not long ago, China was the hottest playground for global architects and outrageous designs. The roots of this trend stretch back to the early 2000s. After decades of drab, utilitarian construction under Mao Zedong, when the motto was national form, socialist content, China's post-reform leaders wanted signature structures to announce the country's new prosperity. The 2008 Beijing Olympics were a turning point, a coming-out party that unleashed an icon craze. In the lead-up to the Games, bureaucrats approved a slate of showpiece projects by famous Western architects. The result was a trophy case of architectural marvels. Beijing's Olympic Park got the Bird's Nest Stadium and Water Cube, innovative structures unlike anything in earlier Chinese architecture. Around the same time, State TV commissioned the now infamous CCTV headquarters, a $900 million looped skyscraper designed by Dutch architect Rem Koolhaas. Its brazen form, a gravity-defying ring of glass and steel, earned it the local nickname Giant Trousers, Da Ku Cha, because it looks like an enormous pair of pants. International starchitects flocked to China's booming cities, where budgets were big and design constraints few. Pritzker Prize winners like Zaha Hadid, Jean Nouvel, Herzog and de Meuron, and others landed major commissions. Zaha Hadid alone saw over 10 projects built in China after 2005. Her works, such as the Galaxy Soho retail office complex in Beijing, completed 2012, introduced sweeping futuristic curves to the skyline. Galaxy Soho's 4 flowing domes connected by bridges were unlike anything in Beijing. Some hailed it as revolutionary, while others criticized it for clashing with the city's traditional character. In provincial capitals, local officials sought their own landmark. Often, they looked abroad for inspiration, or outright imitation. It wasn't just about aesthetics, it was municipal bragging rights. If Shanghai had the Oriental Pearl Tower, a smaller city might build its own striking tower or copy a European monument to put itself on the map. Chinese pop culture certainly took notice. By the early 2010s, Chinese social media was teeming with photos of odd new buildings and the colorful nicknames people gave them. There was the Big Egg, the oval-shaped National Performing Arts Center in Beijing. The Twisted Donut, an enormous circular office tower in Guangzhou designed to resemble an ancient jade disc, also likened to a giant coin. A skyscraper in Suzhou with an arch was mocked as the pair of long johns, because it looked like huge pants, rivaling Beijing's Big Pants. A building in Guangxi shaped like a mammoth golden male anatomy, prompted so many jokes that censors had to step in. Even government buildings got in on the trend. One district office built a near copy of the US Capitol dome, and an art school erected a structure resembling a Disney fairy tale castle. China in this era truly had daring and sometimes bizarre architecture executed at a scale and speed impossible anywhere else. Why did this happen in China, seemingly all at once? Several factors converged: explosive economic growth, local political incentives, and a different cultural attitude toward copying. Local government officials in China are often judged by how much they develop their cities: new infrastructure, impressive GDP growth, eye-catching projects. In the 2000s, that led many to pursue what Chinese media dubbed face projects or vanity projects, extravagant buildings meant to boost a city's image and a cadre's resume. There was also rampant real estate speculation. Cities partnered with developers to build flashy malls, towers, and themed communities to attract investors and tourists. If a Venetian canal town or French chateau-style resort might lure visitors and sell pricey homes, someone was willing to build it. Importantly, China's cultural view on replication has traditionally been more permissive than in the West. Imitating a famous design wasn't seen as shameful kitsch by everyone. Some saw it as a way to learn from the world and quickly acquire modern taste. In one case, when Shanghai planners built Thames Town in 2006, they openly said it was an opportunity to learn from international experience and then use it to China's advantage. Meanwhile, Chinese people were enjoying unprecedented, if minor, freedoms in shaping their environment. Under strict communist planning in earlier decades, architecture was boring and uniform by mandate. But by the 2000s, a new class of wealthy Chinese and relatively empowered local governments could experiment with design. The proliferation of weird buildings was, in a sense, a byproduct of this freer era, testaments of the freedom people had, for the first time in a generation, to experiment with design. Private companies also commissioned avant-garde headquarters to signal their ambition, like the LVMH Tower in Shanghai that locals call the Boot, because it resembles a shiny boot heel. All told, between roughly 2003 and 2013, China's skylines became a wild west of architecture, a blend of ultra-modern structures, national pride monuments, and replicas of nearly every famous building on Earth. It made Chinese cities fascinating and sometimes surreal places. But it also bred excesses, empty ghost towns with European facades and gargantuan public buildings that strained local budgets. The stage was set for a backlash as the costs, financial, cultural, and practical, began to mount. However, just as the rest of the world was marveling or snickering at China's architectural audacity, attitudes within China started to shift. The turning point arrived via the country's top leader. In October 2014, President Xi Jinping stood up at a high-profile symposium in Beijing and delivered an unexpected critique. No more weird buildings. His speech, lasting 2 hours, was about arts and culture's role in society. But when the head of state singles out architecture, citing the CCTV headquarters as an example of what not to build, it's more than an offhand remark. It was effectively a policy signal. Xi declared that art and architecture should serve the people and reflect Chinese values, not be weird for weirdness' sake. He stressed that art, including architecture, must inspire minds, warm hearts, cultivate taste, and clean up undesirable work styles. In plainer terms, this was seen as an extension of Xi's broader crackdown on extravagance and corruption in government. In the same period, Xi was reining in lavish banquets, luxury spending by officials, and other excesses, and flashy public buildings were now added to that list of bad optics. The initial reaction was mixed. On Chinese social media, many cheered Xi's call. State media noted widespread support, with citizens posting sentiments like, "China is not foreigners' testing ground for outlandish designs." Nationalist-leaning voices were pleased to see someone finally stand up to the parade of oddball architecture, much of it designed by foreign firms or seen as aping Western styles. To them, weird buildings had become symbols of officials' vanity and foreign influence. Indeed, one state newspaper, People's Daily, predicted that Xi's 2014 stance spelled the end of modernist designs like the giant trousers CCTV tower in Beijing. On the other hand, the international architecture community was stunned and concerned. China's building boom had been a lifeline for Western architectural firms. Many relied on extravagant Chinese projects to keep their studios afloat. If China was turning its back on bold architecture, it could affect the landscape of architectural practice worldwide, as Arch Daily noted at the time. For a year or so, Xi's pronouncement hung in the air while construction continued under existing plans. But then, in February 2016, China's State Council and Party Central Committee made it official policy. They issued a nationwide directive forbidding oversized, xenocentric, weird buildings devoid of cultural heritage. This was essentially Beijing's edict to all cities: cool it with the crazy architecture. The guideline bluntly said no to odd shapes and Western replicas, urging instead suitable, economical, green and pleasing to the eye design. Notably, it singled out projects like the CCTV tower, Big Pants, and the rash of copycat monuments as negative examples. From now on, public buildings especially should emphasize functionality over showiness. The directive even included a clause to halt new gated communities, a common feature of upscale Chinese housing, citing a need to promote urban connectivity, and perhaps to curb literal and figurative elitism. This midpoint turn in our story is the moment China's leadership essentially said, "Enough is enough." As one urban planning official, Wang Kai, put it, "We shouldn't go overboard in pursuit of appearances." The crackdown on weird architecture was framed as part of building a more practical, people-friendly urban environment. State media tied it to solving urbanization woes like traffic jams and pollution, huge problems in Chinese cities that flashy buildings arguably did nothing to solve. But beyond the practical, the mandate also carried a clear ideological message. The end of weird architecture dovetailed with Xi Jinping's campaigns to champion frugality, revive traditional values, and keep foreign ideas at bay. It came amid a tightening anti-corruption drive and anxiety about economic slowdown. In other words, China's leadership was redefining what progress looked like. No longer glass skyscrapers shaped like pants or European palaces popping up in Henan province, but something more sober and culturally confident. From this midpoint forward, our narrative shifts from the origins of weird architecture to its consequences and comparisons. What happened once the ban came down? How did it play out in practice, And what does it tell us about China's direction versus other countries? The immediate consequence of China's ban on weird architecture was a noticeable change in the kinds of projects getting approved. Overnight, local officials had to think twice before green-lighting that next wild landmark. Some planned projects were likely toned down or cancelled. For example, proposals for fantastical skyscrapers or novelty buildings quietly disappeared. By 2016, Chinese architects and developers were being nudged to prioritize cultural tradition and harmony with surroundings over bold novelty. The State Council's directive applied primarily to public buildings, meaning government-funded projects couldn't be vanity sculptures anymore. Private developers theoretically had more leeway, but in China, few will proceed if the political winds are against it. The result? In the last few years, Chinese cityscapes have seen fewer bizarre shapes and more restrained designs. One striking illustration is the rise of annual ugliest buildings lists in China's media. A Beijing architecture website started a public poll in 2010 for China's ugliest new buildings, and it continues to this day. The existence of this contest suggests a growing domestic awareness, even embarrassment, about gaudy architecture. Past winners of the ugly building poll read like a greatest hits of the weird era. A county government office modelled on the US Capitol, an art college resembling a pink Disney castle, and a media centre in Guangxi that, yes, looks exactly like a giant penis, complete with celebratory fireworks at the tip. The fact that Chinese netizens and experts openly ridicule these designs shows how sentiment shifted. What was once built with pride can end up a subject of public scorn. The poll's organisers define ugly buildings as those that function poorly, clash with their environment, have strange shapes, or copy famous landmarks, essentially mirroring the government's own criteria. In 2021, the top-voted ugly candidate was a gigantic 5-arch gate built at a university campus for no apparent reason, a purely ornamental structure leading nowhere. Comments poured in asking, why was this built at all? The government's crackdown gave teeth to this critical sentiment. In 2021, China's National Development and Reform Commission, NDRC, issued a new directive explicitly stating the construction of ugly architecture should be strictly banned. It didn't define ugly, but everyone understood the implication. Local officials would be held accountable if they wasted money on useless, ostentatious buildings. In fact, Beijing went as far as to restrict skyscraper heights to curb the vanity project syndrome. Under rules introduced in 2020 to 2021, most cities are forbidden from building super-tall skyscrapers over 500 meters, and smaller cities face height caps of 150 meters to 250 meters without special approval. Officials who defy these rules can be punished for life, meaning even years later they might answer for an out-of-bounds building. This is serious enforcement. It stems from incidents like a 71-story tower in Shenzhen that mysteriously swayed in 2021, spooking the public and highlighting safety concerns of rushed high-rise construction. China's leaders became increasingly wary that local officials were blindly pursuing construction with little attention to practicality and safety. In other words, form had far outrun function. What about the economic side of all this? Here's where comparisons help. China's architectural crackdown parallels its efforts to rein in local government debt and property bubbles. Throughout the boom years, many extravagant projects were funded by local financing and loans. Authorities often justified them as investments to spur tourism or commercial activity, but not all paid off. By the late 2010s, China was facing a buildup of local debt from infrastructure and real estate ventures. The central government started calling out wasteful construction. As one analysis noted, local authorities commissioned massive projects, often funded through debt, to boost economic growth numbers, raise a city's profile, and bring in tourists. This describes exactly the mechanism behind weird architecture. The consequence was many buildings that later drew criticism for high cost and poor utility. Cracking down on these vanity projects is thus part of China's broader effort to deleverage and promote sustainable growth. It's telling that alongside the ban on weird designs, China also emphasized prefabricated construction and standardized design to cut costs. The government wants 30% of new buildings to use prefabricated components by 2026, aiming to make cityscapes more uniform and efficient. That implies less bespoke craziness and more cookie-cutter high-rises, a big shift from the past frenzy of one-off wonders. Another consequence, foreign architects lost their free rein in China. Patrick Schumacher of Zaha Hadid Architects remarked in 2016 that the new policy was aimed at making China more reliant on its own architectural talent and stopping foreign firms from using China as a lab for brash design ideas. Indeed, after the ban, we see Chinese architects taking center stage with designs that often emphasize cultural elements. A notable example is architect Wang Shu, who won the Pritzker Prize in 2012 and whose works blend modern forms with traditional Chinese materials and aesthetics. Xi Jinping praised such approaches, urging architects and artists to embody traditional Chinese culture in their work. The message to foreign architects: if your style is too outlandish or Western, you might find fewer clients in China now. On the flip side, talented Chinese designers like Ma Yansong of Mad Architects have thrived by proposing bold yet culturally resonant projects. For instance, Mad's Shanshui City concept draws on Chinese landscape painting for inspiration. This rise of critical regionalism in Chinese architecture can be seen as a positive consequence, a search for a unique Chinese modern style instead of copy-pasting either New York's skyline or European streets. Of course, not everyone is celebrating this change. Many architects worry that banning weird buildings might stifle creativity and result in bland uniformity. There's a risk that in avoiding ugliness, cities may settle for mediocrity. Already, some observers note that imposing too many restrictions can lead to sterile, cookie-cutter urban landscapes, exactly what China's skylines, for all their flaws, were not. But supporters argue that Chinese cities have enough landmarks already. Now they need humane, livable design, more parks, better transit, safer structures, rather than eye candy. The truth likely lies in between. The ban removed the extremes of architectural folly, no more phallic skyscrapers or random replicas, but it doesn't automatically guarantee great architecture in their place. That will depend on how planners and architects interpret pleasing to the eye and culturally rooted in the years ahead.